If not used properly, a brush chipper is capable of grabbing you and pulling you into the machine and into the chipper knives. Death or serious injury will be the result. You must exercise caution and use good judgment. The safety of yourself and others depends on it. This video will present selected operating procedures for Vermeer brush chippers, but it is not a substitute for a thorough and complete reading and understanding of the operator's manual and its safety instructions. Transporting to your job site, there are a number of important safety precautions to keep in mind. For your specific model, refer to your operator's manual for selecting the correct towing vehicle and attaching your brush chipper. If equipped with a pintle hitch, open the pintle and back the towing vehicle until the pintle is centered under the pintle ring of the hitch. Lower the tongue until the pintle ring is seated into the pintle hook and latch the pintle. Lock it into place with the cotter pin. Cross safety chains under the tongue and attach them to the towing vehicle. Attach the electrical connector to the towing vehicle. Check that the highway lights and brakes are functioning properly. If you will be working alongside the road, use the necessary traffic diversion methods to redirect motor vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Follow your local highway codes and regulations. Feed all material into the brush chipper from the curb side of the unit. This will allow you to stay away from traffic. Never set up a chipper beneath the tree your crew is pruning or removing, including the area where throw lines, rigging lines, and climbing ropes will be used. Provide enough room around the chipper for the operator to maneuver while feeding brush. Clear away any brush or obstacles that might interfere or cause the operator to trip, stumble, or become entangled while feeding brush. Manage lines, ropes, and other tools so they cannot become entangled in the brush pile. Examine your brush before feeding it into the chipper. Make sure no contaminants are fed, such as stones, wire, nails, or other metal objects which may damage chipper knives or become dangerous projectiles. Also make sure lines, vines, and ropes are not in the brush being fed. These materials and anything attached to them will be pulled in at high speed. Death or serious injury is possible if you are struck, entangled, or pulled into the machine.
For joining us. I'm Serena Fazan. First tonight, a bizarre accident has led to the death of an experienced tree trimmer. As our Jackie Calloway reports, the victim was working with a wood chipper when something went horribly wrong.
It was too late. I mean, when I heard the rope go through.
The sound of something more than just wood grinding in his chipper sent Dwayne Wilson scrambling for the emergency button.
I had a guy that was working back with him on the back of the chipper. I heard a piece of metal that sounded like it went through my chipper. I ran back to shut the machine down. And when I did, I looked over and I seen him laying on the ground.
Miguel Vargas had worked for Dwayne Wilson for the last 7 years and around this massive chipper for the last 4.
When they put the material through the machine, the rope got tangled around his neck.
But today would be the 44-year-old's last.
The victim was at the rear of the wood chipper. He was feeding bundles of tree branches.
Wilson says his friend and employee got entangled in a rope that was caught in those branches. Miguel, according to fellow crew members, struggled against the rope, trying to escape the chipper, but was decapitated within seconds.
He screamed. It's hard to hear. When this thing's running, this thing is so noisy.
The sheriff's office calls what happened here in Carrollwood Village an accident. But for the crew members and the girlfriend Miguel Vargas leaves behind, the question of why may never be answered.
The discharge chute is equipped with a stop to prevent discharging material over the feed table area. Material leaving the chute can cause injury or blindness. Never discharge the chips where there might be bystanders or coworkers. Rotate the discharge chute to the direction you want to deposit the chip material and lock the chute into position. Fold down your in-feed table. Its design is essential for safety when feeding the chipper. Never operate the machine with the feed table removed or modified. The brush chipper feed table is equipped with a lower feed stop bar system that provides a means for the operator to quickly stop the feed rollers if snagged by a branch and pulled toward the machine. Stopping the feed rollers is accomplished by bumping the lower feed stop bar. The location of the bar makes it possible for the operator's leg to strike the bar and shut off the feed, either intentionally or automatically in an emergency situation. If the operator's leg does not strike the bar, the feed will not stop. It is therefore very important to follow all safety instructions for feeding material into the chipper. To prepare for brush feeding, all operators must use proper personal protective equipment. These include eye protection. This may consist of wraparound safety glasses or safety goggles, hearing protection, either earplugs or earmuff style protectors, a hard hat, and safety shoes. Some conditions may also require reflective clothing. If you wear gloves, gloves with wide flared cuffs must not be worn. They are more likely to be snagged by a branch and possibly pull you toward the in-feed mechanism or the chipper knives. Gloves must have narrow cuffs. Before you start the engine, make sure all personnel are clear of the machine. The feed control bar is in neutral, engine throttle is at idle, and the clutch is disengaged. Start the engine following the instructions in the operator's manual for your particular machine. Your brush chipper is equipped with an upper feed control bar and a lower feed stop bar. Do not operate the chipper unless both upper and lower bars are installed and operating correctly. To check the lower feed stop bar, position the upper feed control bar for forward feeding and start the feed rollers. Bump the lower feed stop bar with your hand or leg to stop the in-feed mechanism. To check the upper feed control bar, position the bar for forward feeding and start the feed rollers. Push the bar to the center stop position. To reverse and back to forward. Pull the bar to the rear stop position. Make sure the feed control bar allows you to quickly stop the rollers. Do not continue unless both upper and lower bars are working properly. Once you are ready to begin feeding brush, place the feed control bar back into forward feed and start the feed rollers. Vermeer chippers are designed to help keep you away from the feed mechanism and chipper knives by providing a long feed chute and feed table. All Vermeer chippers have feed tables with sloped sides. This design allows you to feed brush from the side. When feeding brush this way, the sides of the feed table help protect you from being pulled into the machine by providing a barrier between you and the in-feed mechanism. But it is also essential that you do your part by following important safety precautions while operating the machine. Make it a practice to always feed from the side rather than directly behind the machine. As soon as the limb starts feeding, release the limb and turn away. Let the feed mechanism pull the material into the machine.
At the site, 4 workers were involved in trimming 2 trees. 2 of the workers each climbed a tree and began trimming branches. 2 groundsmen piled the trimmed branches close to the chipper. A worker in a tree lowered his chainsaw by rope and called to one of the groundsmen that he needed more fuel. The groundsman left to get the fuel. The other groundsman started the chipper and began loading branches into it. The 2 workers in the trees reported that they heard the chipper operating for about 5 minutes, and then they heard the engine lose power and stall. One worker called down to see what was happening. There was no reply. The 2 workers rappelled down to the ground. They found that the second groundsman had been pulled through the chipper. Most workplace accidents are preventable. This is likely what happened. The worker was standing partially or completely in front of the feed table loading brush into the chipper. This is a dangerous practice. To avoid getting caught in the chipper, operators should feed brush from the side of the feed table rather than the front. It's possible that the groundsman who died tripped and fell onto the feed table, but from looking at the causes of similar accidents, it is more probable that the worker's gloves or clothing got caught by brush being fed through the feed rollers. Wear close-fitting clothing to prevent getting snagged.
Vermeer brush chippers, BC 1000 XL and larger, are equipped with an eco-idle engine control system. The operator can select the eco-idle function, which automatically lowers engine speed to a preset lower RPM. If no material has been shipped for 1 or 5 minutes, as selected by the operator. Eco-idle engine control system can help consume less fuel if the feeding process has frequent interruptions, and also aid in noise reduction. Vermeer brush chippers are equipped with Smart Feed, a system that helps improve feeding efficiency by allowing you to start the feeding process and then turn away. Large limbs with protruding branches may present a hazard unless you handle them correctly. All chippers which are capable of feeding a limb are also capable of pulling you in with the limb. This risk can be reduced by following these important safety precautions. Always feed material with the base entering the feed mechanism first. If you feed the tip of the limb first, a protruding branch or V-shaped limb can catch you and pull you toward the feed mechanism. By feeding with the base first, any protruding branches will tend to slip past you without catching you or your clothing. Sometimes during feeding, a limb may suddenly turn or move sideways and strike you. To reduce the possibility of being struck, release the limb immediately after it begins feeding and then turn away. If material being fed strikes the lower feed stop bar and stops the end feed mechanism, you may use one of the following procedures. You may override the feed system by pressing the green Hold to Run reset button and feeding the material into the chipper until it has passed over the lower feed stop bar. You can also resume chipping by placing the upper feed control bar into reverse, backing out, and repositioning the material. Then placing the upper feed control bar into forward feeding and refeeding the material. When feeding short material, never climb onto the feed table to hand feed material into the feed mechanism. If you climb onto the feed table for closer access with the machine operating, you are in great danger, including death or serious injury. If you climb onto the feed table to reach for short branches or twigs, they can feed into the machine before you can let go, or you might accidentally get too close and touch the feed mechanism. Do not try to kick material into the feed rollers. If the feed mechanism or knives catch your foot, you will not be able to pull yourself free. Do not depend on the upper control bar or the lower feed stop bar to stop the feed mechanism and prevent you from being pulled into the machine. You may not be able to reach the bar or have time to move the bar to stop the feed mechanism. When feeding short material, always stand to the side of the feed table and use a branch to push the material into the feeding mechanism. Make sure lines, vines, and rope are not in the brush being fed. These materials and anything attached to them will be pulled in at high speed. Death or serious injury is possible if you are struck, entangled, or pulled into the machine. If Smart Feed is unsuccessful in feeding material and you have issues with the jam in the in-feed mechanism, your first step should be to use the upper feed control bar to reverse the material out. Reposition it and feed it again. Trim the material if it continues to present feeding issues. If the discharge chute or chipper housing becomes plugged, you will need to completely shut the machine down in order to clear the plug. Do not try to remove a plug while the engine is running. Follow the normal shutdown procedure as described in your operator's manual. Place the upper feed control bar into neutral. Reduce the engine speed to idle. Disengage the drive mechanism. Shut off the engine and remove the key. The cutter disc or drum will continue to rotate for some time after the drive mechanism is disengaged. Before opening the chipper housing, verify the cutter disc or drum has come to a complete stop. Depending on the chipper, check either end of the shaft, drive belts, or disc to make certain that rotation has stopped. Follow your operator's manual for the proper way to tell if the disc or drum has stopped turning. Do not open the chipper housing to check for rotation. Do not restart the disc or drum while the housing is open. You can be struck by thrown objects or be severely injured by the rotating disc or drum. Follow your operator's manual for the proper way to gain access to a plugged discharge chute or chipper housing. Wear gloves when cleaning out the plugged area and use caution when working near the exposed chipper knives. Thoroughly clean the plugged area before closing the housing. If material builds up around the feed mechanism and impairs operation, follow your operator's manual for directions on how to access and clean the in-feed mechanism. Never climb onto the feed table for any reason unless the machine is completely shut down and all components have stopped moving. Chipper knives and the drum or disc should be inspected periodically and maintained according to the instructions provided with your machine. Vermeer brush chippers will be productive for you only when the chipping system is properly installed, adjusted, and maintained. Inspection and maintenance are essential. If a machine component is loose, damaged, or out of adjustment, and you continue to use the machine, a cutting component may break loose and become a dangerous projectile. Not only will this cause extensive damage to the machine, but it may cause death or serious injury. Following safe working practices when feeding brush into a brush chipper is absolutely essential. Use good judgment when operating your Vermeer brush chipper. Respect the potential dangers and the fatal consequences of improper operation.
This situation, very terrible, yes. We never thought that he was gonna end his life like this.
For the family of a landscaper, the shock is sinking in. While one son can only put his arms on his head in disbelief, another is consoled by his fiancée, Brenda Zapata.
We're not gonna get to see him. We're not gonna see his face smiling for one more time.
According to Chandler police and fire officials, the landscaper was part of a crew working on trees at Freeway Chevrolet Thursday morning. Two of his own sons were on that crew with him when somehow the man lost his balance and fell headfirst into an industrial-sized wood chipper. A landscaper who had decades of experience and knew the rules of safety, but one simple slip was all it took to take his life.